In 1593, King Henry IV of France stood before his people and made one of history's most famous political promises. He declared that no peasant in his kingdom should be so poor that they couldn't have a chicken in their pot every Sunday. Beautiful sentiment, right? The kind of thing that gets inscribed on monuments and quoted in history books. But here's what the king didn't realize. While he was busy making speeches about abundance, the peasants were already eating just fine. They didn't need his chicken, and honestly, they didn't need him either. For 500 years before that royal promise, their pots had been filled by a different Henry altogether. Not a monarch sitting on a throne, but a plant growing in the dirt. They called it Good King Henry, and it might just be the most important vegetable you've never heard of. If this story changes how you think about what's growing in your backyard, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below, because we're about to uncover something the modern world desperately tried to make us forget. So let's set the scene. From the 12th century all the way until the Industrial Revolution, this single plant was basically the engine of European survival. It grew in every cottage garden from the hills of England to the farmlands of Germany. Nobody bought it at a market. Nobody ordered seeds from a catalog every spring. And here's the part that should make you sit up and pay attention. It was perennial. You planted it in the ground one time and it fed you for the rest of your life. Your children would still be eating from that same plant 20 years later. Imagine that for a second. One afternoon of work in exchange for decades of food. That's not gardening. That's a cheat code for survival. Now, if you walked into a Tudor garden around 1550, Good King Henry was the anchor of the whole operation. In March, it would shoot up these thick stalks that tasted like sweet asparagus. By May, it was producing leaves that tasted like spinach, and it just kept going until the frost finally shut it down. For centuries, this plant was the backbone of what they called medieval vegetable soup, a hearty broth combined with leeks and chard and bread that sustained peasant farmers through absolutely brutal winters. The Romans knew about it too. Pliny the Elder wrote about a plant that Emperor Tiberius demanded as tribute from Germanic tribes. Most historians believe he was talking about Good King Henry. The Emperor of Rome wanted this plant so badly, he was collecting it as a form of payment. Think about that power dynamic for a moment. And when you look at the nutritional profile, modern spinach starts to look like soggy cardboard by comparison. Studies have measured the nutritional content of Good King Henry, and the results are staggering. More iron than spinach, more calcium than milk, vitamin C levels that are off the charts. It contains more B vitamins than most leafy greens on the market today. Complete nutrition from a plant that required absolutely zero annual labor. No tilling the soil every spring. No replanting. No buying new seeds year after year. It just showed up like a loyal friend who always remembers your birthday. So here's the million-dollar question. Where is it? Why are we spending billions of dollars trying to genetically modify climate-resilient crops when the perfect drought-proof vegetable already exists and has been proven to work for 5 centuries? The answer isn't some shadowy conspiracy, though it might feel like one. It's actually a geometry problem that spiraled into something much bigger. The murder of Good King Henry began in 1701 with an English farmer named Jethro Tull. And no, not the rock band, though that would make this story considerably weirder. Tull invented something called the seed drill, a brilliant machine that mechanized the planting process. But here's the catch. The seed drill had one very specific requirement. It demanded uniformity. The machine favored annuals, crops you plant from scratch every single year in perfect straight rows. Wheat, corn, turnips. Everything neat and organized and predictable. But Good King Henry? It was chaos in plant form. It grew in clumps. It spread through its roots. It absolutely refused to stay in a line. You couldn't plant it with a drill. You couldn't mechanize the harvest. In the emerging language of industrial agriculture, it was labeled inefficient. Not because it didn't feed people, mind you. It fed people spectacularly well. It was inefficient because it didn't cooperate with the machines. The situation got worse in 1837 when John Deere invented the steel plow. For the first time in history, farmers could break virgin prairie soil and transform it into farmland. But perennial root systems, the kind good King Henry developed over decades of growth, were the enemy of that plow. They held the soil together. They resisted breaking. Annual crops with their shallow, weak little roots were so much easier to deal with. You plowed, you planted, you harvested, you plowed again. The entire system started selecting for annuals, not because they were better for the soil, not because they were more nutritious, not because they were better for farmers in any meaningful way, but because they were better for machines. By 1900, the tractor had replaced the horse, and every piece of equipment being built was designed to do exactly one thing: wipe the earth clean and start fresh every spring. Perennials like good King Henry fought back against this approach. Their roots went down 3 feet into the ground. They held the soil in place. They broke the plows. And in the eyes of the machine, this plant's greatest strength, its incredible resilience, became its fatal flaw. But wait, there's more to this story, because machines were only half the problem. If the tractor was the weapon, the business model was the motive. In the 1920s, the modern commercial seed industry absolutely exploded, and companies realized a fundamental truth about capitalism that changed everything. Perennials are a terrible product. Think about it from a business perspective. If I sell you a packet of spinach seeds, you have to come back and buy more next year. And the year after that. And the year after that. That's recurring revenue, baby. That's a subscription model before subscriptions were cool. But if I sell you good King Henry seeds, I never see you again. You plant it once, and your grandchildren are still harvesting from it 2 decades later. That's self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency is the absolute enemy of profit. By 1950, seed catalogs had quietly dropped perennial vegetables from their offerings. Good King Henry disappeared from commercial availability, not because it stopped working, but because it worked too well for the wrong people. Then came the final nail in the coffin, something called the Green Revolution. In 1960, Norman Borlaug introduced high-yielding dwarf wheat varieties with a simple promise: more calories per acre. Sounds great, right? But the cost was hidden in the fine print: total dependence on synthetic fertilizers, complete mechanization, annual replanting every single year without exception. The Green Revolution saved 1 billion people from starvation, and that's absolutely true. But it also locked global agriculture into a system where perennial vegetables had no place at the table. Governments subsidized annual grain crops. Universities focused their research budgets on corn, wheat, and soybeans. Agricultural extension services taught farmers to think in planting seasons instead of perennial plots. We bet the entire farm on annuals, and we accepted a system where 70% of our cropland requires violent tillage every single year, destroying the soil, releasing carbon into the atmosphere, and demanding synthetic fertilizers just to keep anything growing at all. Here's a statistic that should genuinely disturb you. Today, annual crops occupy 70% of global cropland, while perennial crops occupy just 13%. But 94% of all plant species on Earth are perennial. We looked at the exception and made it the rule. We chose the minority and forced it to become the majority. And what exactly did we lose in that trade? Let's start with the soil. Annual agriculture requires tillage. Every year you break the earth open, plant your seeds, and then leave the soil completely bare for months at a time. Wind erosion, water runoff, carbon release. The American Dust Bowl of the 1930s was caused by exactly this practice, plowing up perennial prairie grasses and replacing them with annual wheat. Perennials like good King Henry have root systems that extend 3 feet or more into the ground. They hold soil together year-round. They prevent erosion naturally. They sequester carbon without any human intervention. Research shows that perennial crops reduce soil erosion by up to 50% compared to annuals. Then there's the water situation. Annual crops lose up to 5 times more water than perennials because their shallow roots simply cannot access deep moisture in the ground. In a world increasingly facing water scarcity, we somehow managed to build our entire food system around the most water-inefficient plants possible. And don't even get me started on the chemicals. Annual monocultures require synthetic fertilizers because tilling destroys soil biology. They require pesticides because bare fields are sitting ducks for weeds and pests. Perennials like Good King Henry needed none of this. Their deep roots accessed nutrients other plants couldn't reach. Their year-round coverage suppressed weeds naturally. We are now living with the bill for that decision, and the invoice includes soil erosion, water scarcity, and nutrient collapse across the board. But here's where it gets interesting. Nature plays the long game, and while the tractors were busy conquering the fields, Good King Henry didn't actually die. It retreated. It survived in the margins, tucked away in the gardens of stubborn grandmothers in Yorkshire who refused to give up the old ways. It grew in wild patches near old monasteries where monks had cultivated it for centuries. It hung on in the mountains of Switzerland where the machines couldn't easily reach. And now the vault is opening again because the rules are finally changing. We're starting to realize that efficiency isn't actually efficient if it destroys the very soil you depend on. In 2009, the Land Institute released something called Kernza, the first commercially viable perennial grain. It took 2 decades of breeding, but perennial wheat is finally becoming a reality. Climate change is forcing us to reconsider our addiction to annuals. Soil degradation is accelerating at alarming rates. Water is becoming increasingly scarce. And suddenly, the characteristics we bred out of our food system, deep roots, permanent ground coverage, genuine self-sufficiency, look less like inefficiency and more like survival itself. The good news? Good King Henry never actually disappeared from the earth. You can buy seeds online today. You can plant them this spring. And unlike every other vegetable you grow, you won't have to plant them again next year. They'll return every single year for the next 2 decades. The shoots will emerge in March, the leaves will follow in April, and you'll taste something most people haven't experienced in over a century. Food that doesn't depend on a system, food that opts out of the machine entirely, food that grows on its own timeline, by its own rules, without asking anyone's permission. King Henry IV's promise of a chicken in every pot depended on wealth, on commerce, on a functioning economy that could deliver on royal proclamations. When economies collapsed, that promise collapsed right along with them. But the other King Henry, the one that lived in gardens for 500 years, asked for absolutely nothing. It just grew. One made a promise that required the entire world to cooperate. The other kept a promise the world had forgotten how to hear. And maybe, just maybe, we're finally starting to listen again. If you want to be part of this quiet rebellion, consider planting something that exists outside the industrial timeline. Something that doesn't need a tractor or a seed company or a king's permission to thrive. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell because we're digging up the history they tried to plow over, one forgotten plant at a time. Some promises are made with words, but the ones that really matter are kept in roots that refuse to die. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you plant Good King Henry in your garden? I'll see you in the next one.